first I'll introduce myself. I'm Helen. I work here at Apolitical. I'm based in London and I work on campaigns and communications at Apolitical. So basically putting together lots of our free online workshops like this one and email boot camps that you might have taken in the past. If you've just joined us, please do keep those introductions coming in the chat. It's great to learn a little bit about who's with us in the virtual room today. Now, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, I'll tell you a little bit about Apolitical. And if it is your first time, please do let us know in the chat. Forgive me also for looking at my second screen if I'm not making eye contact with you right now. I promise I'll be back in just a minute. But a little bit about Apolitical. Apolitical is a network and learning platform used by over 150,000 public servants and policymakers from 170 countries around the world. Our mission is to build 21st century governments that work for people and the planet by putting the best knowledge and skills at the fingertips of public servants around the world. Now, we do this through events, courses, and our knowledge sharing platform and network. Now, I'm really excited for our workshop ahead of us today about how to cut out jargon. You may have also heard it called BS, and communicate with more clarity in the public service. So before I hand it over to Hillary to really dive into this, a few technical notes. So first, we are going to be recording this session. You should have heard it tell you that when you join or seen that pop up on your screen. We'll be hosting this online on the Apolitical website via Vimeo. Now, we do this so that participants and Apolitical members can review the content on demand to further their learning. And it also lets us share the content with any participants who are unable to make it to this session, for example, in different time zones. Now, please do be aware that viewers of the recording will be able to see your Zoom username if you come off mute. They may be able to see your image if you have your camera on, in addition to any information contained in your background. Please do let me know or let my colleague Vipasha know if you have any questions about this. And if you have any further questions, you can find the contact details of our data protection officer at the footer of our homepage. We do also have live transcription available on this call, and I'm actually going to copy and paste this and put it in the chat so that you can have some directions there. You should be able to toggle this off and on in the settings at the bottom of your screen. So please do feel free to have them on or off, whichever you prefer. One note just about this particular workshop. So Hillary is going to be writing a follow-up article after this workshop, and she actually initially wrote an article that sparked the workshop in the first place. She may be quoting some responses from the chat in the article, especially responses to specific questions we'll be asking. They're going to be completely anonymous, so your name will not be revealed, anything about where you work or department or location. But if you feel uncomfortable having even the answer shared, I can let you know when you can refrain from responding in the chat. She may also share the results of poll questions in the aggregate, but we're not going to be revealing the identity of anyone who voted or anyone's individual votes. Now, if you have any questions about this, you can get in touch with me at helen.caldwell@apolitical.co, and my colleague Vipasha can maybe put that in the chat as well. So feel free to email me with any questions, but the key points are absolutely anonymous and absolutely up to you whether or not you want to participate. So now we can finally get into the meat of today's conversation. We're really fortunate to have Hillary Sutcliffe joining us and really leading this conversation today. But we first want to hear from you. So as I said, we're going to kick off with a question. Hillary may be using some of these responses specifically in her article. So again, if you'd rather not have them included anonymously, don't respond. But the question is, what do you think is the most irritating jargon you've seen in the public service, or BS you've seen in the public service? So maybe those words or phrases that get thrown around. Maybe it's something you've seen in your department or your team. Maybe it's something you've seen at a country level. Just have a think, and you can put it in a word or a couple of words. I'm really excited to see these coming in on the chat. I saw some of Hillary's examples earlier, and I've got to say I was feeling pretty called out as well. So if you see these and you feel a little bit like you're being put on the spot too for some things you've used, that's fine. We're here to learn together. Some great ones I'm seeing coming in: holistic, that's great. Deep dive, overuse of acronyms, absolutely, we've heard that. Circle back, journey, a lot of people say acronyms and abbreviations. Golden thread, that's a great one. Silo, synergy, organic, these are great. Moving forward, reach out, oversight, oh, synergy, yes. Down the rabbit hole, climate smart, that's a really interesting one. Out of the box, efficiency, blue sky thinking. I think I remember Hillary pointed that one out as well. So many good ones here. Also, somebody who's made a great clarification, especially acronyms that no one explains. So acronyms that get dropped in and never really get returned to or sort of fully spelled out. Roadmap, brigading, great. These are really great. I know, Hillary, you're excited to really go into these in depth. I was about to say dive in and then I stopped myself. Low-hanging fruit. Amazing. Thank you all so much for taking part in this. I know we'll be sort of coming back to some of the specific examples as well, but great to see what your particular bugbears or your particular frustrations are in your own department or team. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to Hillary, and then I'm going to turn it over to her and you can hear what she has to say. So Hillary Sutcliffe is the director of London-based not-for-profit Society Inside. Through her work on ethics and trust in policy, business, and academia, Hillary saw firsthand the quite serious problems created by the jargon-filled language used by all of us. Inspired by the C.R.A.P. framework devised by Canadian academic Professor Ian McCarthy, she began to use this thinking in her work on building organizational and interpersonal trust. A natural Yorkshire tendency towards plain speaking, combined with decades of researching how to write more clearly for her own writing and presenting, has given her insights and practical tips, which she enjoys sharing to help individuals and organizations be better understood. So, Hillary, take it away.
Thank you very much. Let me get this screen shared. Really appreciate all of you coming on and loved a lot of those jargons you put in there, of which I use all the time. Granular, I used in a call just about 10 minutes ago. So let me share this screen here and we'll get started. So we're looking here at jargon and bullshit. Now, since I've been reading Ian's work and a lot of academic work on bullshit, I can just say it now, like, I don't have to put a star in there. I can just say it. So excuse me if I'm now just using, if it's a real academic thing, I can just say it. So this is about why we use it and how to stop. And what I'm going to do in this presentation, I'm going to look at, so what is jargon and bullshit and why we do it. And then I'm going to just talk through, except my machine has stopped moving. Interesting. This is interesting. I'm going to stop sharing and have a little small heart attack here. And I've no idea why that is, and it's never happened before.
If you need me, Hillary, I can always share from my computer. I've got it up as well.
Let me try one more time, because I have, only got the most expensive piece of kit that it's humanly possible to buy to do this. And then if not, I'll have, yeah, now it's working. What is this? Tech. So the consequences for trust and distrust of bullshit, how we comprehend, recognize and act and prevent it, Ian's C.R.A.P framework, and hints and tips on how to avoid it. So everybody has to start with definitions. I'm really sorry, but there's a good reason to start with definitions and why jargon is the only one of many writing sins. So here's Ian's definition, and this is the academic definition of bullshit, which is making statements with no regard for the truth. And they make a distinction between liars and bullshitters, because liars care about the truth and subvert the truth, whereas bullshitters just don't care. And something that they communicate or not, they don't even care if there's truth involved at all. And there's some academic, dictionary definitions. Complete nonsense, something that's not true. Nonsense, lies, exaggeration, talk foolishly, boastfully, or idly. So those two things have got a lot of things about boastfulness and a lot of things about, being untruthful. But I don't know about that, because when we look at a lot of the things in the chat there and you think, well, that's bullshit, it's not all malign and it's not all something that's just foolish and stupid. When we look at all these things, jargon, cliche, overuse, exaggeration, euphemism, bluster, pseudo-profound, that's a new thing, by the way. Pseudo-profound language is the thing now. Noun speak, acronyms, abstract language, pretentious language. These are all, these are not necessarily malign. They can be used for really different reasons. Oh, you are joking me. Hey guys, this isn't getting really bad. What am I going to do with this? I've done hundreds of presentations. What shall I do? I'll try one more time and then we'll have to have you. But the long and the short of that is that it's not really fair to say that we all use this bullshit for malign purposes. So if I try one more time, and Helen then will get. So just let's have a look at jargon, because we've said jargon and you've been looking and talking about jargon. And I got here a great project, Premier Inn's 33 worst business jargon ranked. Now, when we look at all these, honestly, I mean, there are so many. I think almost all of them, look, circle backs in there, outside the box, extra mile, they're all in there. They're all in there. And we use them all the time. And that's part of the interesting thing for me. Why are we using them all the time when we all hate them? And now it has really frozen. So Helen, what we're going to do is you're going to put it up on yours. And I'm going to just have a little small heart attack. So while you do, well, we'll get to the next one actually. So we're looking at reasons why we bullshit. So actually I developed this thing called the Bullshit Analysis Reflection Framework, inspired by Ian's C.R.A.P framework, the B.A.R.F framework. And one of the things I've seen is that actually we're not just looking at sort of a malign intent. Oh yeah, there we go. So because looking at these as well, you know, they're cultural. I mean, when this project was done by Premier Inn, which is a slight odd thing, but they found that most of them were used by Americans, and therefore it's Europeans, English, and maybe Canadians. I don't know you Canadians out there. I'm sorry to the Americans. This is a cultural thing, because it may not be sort of as bullshit in a different context. And then the next one also, Helen, you know, it's about pretentiousness. It's just about the intent behind you using this. Do you think you're looking good or not? And then the next one is actually very much about, these were once someone's really good ideas. The Economist Style Guide says that about cliche. Somebody coined those and they were great because they were new and fresh and they meant something. It's just that now we just overused them. And sort of those three things as well make me sort of more sympathetic to us all when we're trying to use these different things. So the next one then, Helen, is reasons why we bullshit in the B.A.R.F framework. So again, it's about intent, if we keep going, and it's also about competence. And I think that's part of it, and that's part of these new definitions. It's about manipulation, distraction, or evading responsibility. Now, we know when we see people, that is really bullshit. And we were just talking earlier about Monsieur Trump, who obviously is a master of bullshit in a very deliberate, manipulative way to distract or evade responsibility. But secondly, also, it's about appearing important or serious or dispassionate or avoiding emotion. And a lot of organizations, and I do feel that this is, you know, particularly difficult in the public sector, you have to appear serious. You want to look important. You want these things to look unemotive and dispassionate. So the language just gets sucked of any freshness, because we have to do that in our organizations. And following the next one also, it's about fitting in. I mean, obviously, a lot of our organizations communicate like that number two, because that's the way organizations are. So we have to do that to fit in. And it's just suddenly a cascading slippery slope. You know, everybody's talking like it. Nobody even wants to. You also want to impress people. So you sort of get the lingo that's going down in whatever organization you're in. I've been doing a lot of work with academia, and I'm talking about, you know, framing, and, you know, I resisted when it was socio-technical imaginaries, and I just realized and it came to my senses. But also, you know, to seem to oneself and others just more interesting. And finally, actually, possibly the most important, because we're busy and it's just a little bit lazy, and writing is really, really hard. So we wanted to just do a poll. If you move to the next one, Helen, and you're going to introduce this bit, aren't you?
Yes, I will. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. You should see it pop up on your screen. If you don't, feel free to just respond in the chat. You can see it on the slide as well, but I'll go ahead and read it out also. So the question is, why do you think people BS or use jargon? So Hillary sort of outlined the reasons here, but what do you think? Maybe in the examples that you've seen most often, would you say it is to manipulate, to appear serious and avoid emotion, to impress or appear to belong? That final point, writing is hard and it's easier to just rely on those cliches and jargon. Or do you think it's something else? And if it's something else, please do share what other reason you think in the chat. So we can give everybody a minute or so to vote.
And these are not in stone. So if there's another one or another clustering, I would be super excited. You see, super. Oh, super excited. That's got to be in the bullshit thing, hasn't it? Super anything has got to be in there. Yeah.
Great responses coming in on the chat as well. Sort of seeing combinations.
Yeah.
Great. I'll go ahead and I can just see the final sort of responses coming in. We're at about 80% participation. So I'll go ahead and end the poll and bring up the results so we can see them. So
Wow.
pretty clear, interesting, like a pretty clear majority here for that impress or appear to belong, 63% there, 17% on the writing is hard point, 9% saying to appear serious, 4% to manipulate, and 7% saying something else, and lots of really good examples of something else in the chat.
Very interesting, really interesting. What a great poll, thank you. So the next, from the next slide. So we're going to take each one of these in turn and just have a little look at some examples and some sort of types of language that get used under these sorts of headings. So to manipulate, distract, or evade responsibility. Here's a couple of sort of watch outs, if you can put those up, Helen. So I'm going to use this frame that was this word that was invented by a friend, Roger Miles, on the in relation to the article that we did, institutionalized gaslighting. Now, this is a great phrase because political leaders do this a lot, and our esteemed leader in the UK at the moment has been known to do this. It's sort of like a parallel language or alternative facts, even fake news, simply even a set of sensible sounding words that describe what's happening, but they're just not true. So you're sort of feeling, you're thinking, no, that's not right. Is that right? And, you know, you can see it either as direct lies, but often it's just there to distract or evade responsibility. And you see that in companies a lot, you know, the washing, greenwashing, trust washing, all of those washing. It's sort of words, but, you know, they're really not true, and they're more about evasion. And next to that as well is euphemisms. So actually, when you look at these euphemisms that we use a lot, you know, right size, we invent, you know, right size. Value engineering was they used cost cutting. That was part of the decision-making process to use the cladding in Grenfell Tower. And the document management policy was the shredding process, the shredding of Enron and all of the documents that they shredded. So again, we're using these sort of euphemisms just to take attention a little bit away from the hard things or from the evasive things that we're trying to do. And next, excuse me, is this idea of bluster, just meaningless, extraneous words and phrases, hot air. And this, you know, I couldn't even give you an example because it would be too long. But, you know, I know this from academia, and I know this as well from, there's a great phrase that Ian has said in his thing, that this social expectation of having an answer, actually, this, you know, new corporate sort of style of, you know, you have to contribute, that leads to bullshit too, because you feel you have to contribute something and you can't think of it. So words just come out. But also, you know, it is something that particularly in certain contexts, people do just lots of words. You saw that with, in the UK, we have, I don't know if it's like that in your other countries, we have the politicians speaking about COVID, and then we have the scientists there in a little row, and the journalists ask the scientists a question and you get an answer, and then they ask the politicians, and you just get this stuff comes out and you can't even find out what's true and what's not. And then finally there, we're looking at, sorry, Helen, let's say yours is frozen as well. You're expecting, oh, this pseudo-profound, wholeness, quiet, infinite phenomena. This was used in some academic work to try and find out if people could discern pseudo-profound bullshit from profoundness. And they found that Deepak Chopra's work is indistinguishable from actual bullshit, which is awful, isn't it? Okay, and the next one, we're going to look at this idea. Oh, yes, and these are, you know, organizationally, this is about integrity. This is not about learning to speak differently. This is about a whole cultural issue of integrity. And following on to the next one, which I think, you know, about appearing important, you know, these are, our organizations really do take out the sort of emotion and the soul of us as individuals, and we use that in our language. So, you know, we can't, these junk phrases or noun speak, all sorts of nouns all in a row. Loss of functionality means it just doesn't work. You know, website content delivery platforms, all these sort of words just added and added one to the next to make a phrase that it just becomes utterly meaningless. And fillers, this is a great one. When I did this on LinkedIn, someone said in terms of, it's like, I use in terms of all of the time, but this is because you just, you have to put these things in. You just feel that you can't really distill it so much and you really don't know what to say. Acronyms we've got, as you say, lots of them without explanation. And jargon, the actual meaning of jargon really is out of place specialist language or academic words. It's not just the stuff that we saw early. And dry, colourless language, no freshness, no personality. And I'm putting euphemisms back in again, because talking to somebody as well in a government department with a very difficult job, in a really emotive and difficult area of government. And actually, when you're dealing in that sort of very difficult, emotional, stressful area, I think that's why we resort to these sort of euphemisms, because it's really difficult and it's quite, you have to distance yourself. That's why I think a lot of the time doctors use terribly unemotive language. You've got to distance themselves. And that really is about organizational openness and about being more, allowing people to be themselves and to speak up and to contribute without having to do that within the confines of the organizational culture. And the next one is our favorite here, which is to fit in and impress and seem more interesting. And I think the watch outs for that, Helen, are, these meaningless buzzwords. Look, top splicing, I mean, really, upstream intervention, soft launch. I saw in the public service that soft launch was one that everybody really hates. But again, these were great. These are not bad. It's just that they get overused and then we're all just fed up with them. And the next one, I think, really, cliches and overused phrases, all those ones we had before. But this is about overuse, I think, as much as anything else, and about them not really being our sorts of phrases. And the following after that is this exaggeration, actually, which is my worst thing, because I exaggerate everything. I always have to have it bigger and more important and more, the percentage is larger and everything like that. And my favorite one at the moment with our government is we're going to be a global superpower in absolutely everything. I don't know how we're going to manage it, but we absolutely are. And these important sounding combinations like zero tolerance, critical enablers, anything that's key. I mean, I use key all the time and I'm trying to take it out, but we're just feeling that we've not said anything just quite interesting enough. So we have to add these really sorts of, important sounding modifiers. And this 110%, yes. The next one after that is about this enthusiastic wording. People don't like this idea of passion. I mean, I'm now really, anybody says I'm passionate about, some people genuinely are, but as soon as they say it, you sort of think, yeah, right. And humbled came up on LinkedIn. I'm humbled to be invited. I am blooming humbled that 556 people have come on this call. Absolutely humbled, but you can't say it, can you? Because you just think, oh God, look at her. And finally, on that one, sorry. Have you frozen? Is it me?
I think you're all good, Hillary. Just okay. Make sure everyone stays on mute, please, so we can keep that background noise out of the way.
So keep going, Helen. Unpretentiousness. I just saw this the other day in Hanover Square. They were doing some building works, which was a big thing of public realm improvements. You got to love them to actually put that in, but pretentious is just so pretentious. So those are the things there that sort of irritate us within that fitting in a sort of framework. Now, and the next one, and that's really about intent as well. So the intent is not malign. We're just doing our best here. And following on that one, excuse me, just to quote, keeping going with this, Helen, it is really hard. It's really, really hard. So all of the previous things we use because it's really hard. And I'd just like to quote here Professor Joe Moran, who's written a really good book and a really good article here, The Scourge of Managerial Blah. And he says, most people have no great facility with words. Tying nouns together with weak verbal prepositional knots is the simplest and quickest way to rustle up a sentence and achieve superficial fluency. Long, but actually that is true. We're just trying to cobble it together and get it out. So moving on with that is a competence thing. So this is really more about what this little sort of, see, I've got myself in such a panic with this damn thing not working. I can't even speak myself now. So moving on, Helen, I think the consequences of this, and this little diagram here, I don't want you need to look at it, but these are our sort of drivers of trust, the sort of indicators of trustworthiness. And this is where I came from, looking at what these things do and why language and bullshit actually erodes trust. So we'll just flick through those, Helen. The obvious lack of integrity, because even if you aren't doing this to manipulate, the organization looks sort of, it doesn't look very understandable, and people think you're trying to pull one over on them, and they don't trust leaders, and they don't trust each other, and they don't trust the organization if it's sort of a bullshit organization. But also, basically, people don't even understand each other, and so they don't listen to each other, and we don't care about each other's perspectives. I mean, this really undermines teamwork, effectiveness, and productivity. I was on a call with a business just before, and he says it's just endemic there, very well-known business, and they don't know what to do about it. And this is exactly happened to them. It's undermining everything. And following the next one, you know, outsiders, and this is particularly important for you in the public service, you know, citizens don't understand you, so they draw their own conclusions, and usually negative conclusions. But also, following, stakeholders aren't open to your ideas, and this is one of the big things. When they don't trust you, they're not open to your ideas, they don't want to collaborate with you, and they assume the worst about you. And we've seen that in politics. You can't even, if you've lost trust, whatever you say is you're going to take, you know, with the worst possible interpretation. And finally, I think also it's this suspicion of manipulation and bad intent, even if there isn't. If this blizzard of words means nobody really understands what you're doing, we just assume that there's some bad intent behind. But moving to the next one, the consequences of communicating clearly and honestly is that actually people do understand you internally and externally, and they're more likely to understand what you're trying to say and trying to do. And secondly, staff internally are more likely to understand leaders and each other and be clear about their organizational purpose and their role. And the value statements actually often get in the way of that. MIT did a great project that evaluated with employees the use of these big values, slightly bullshitty sort of initiatives, and their correlation to the actions of the organization, and they're reverse correlated. The more bullshitty the values, the more they are likely not to be delivered internally, which is depressing, isn't it? But because you're open and honest, stakeholders are more likely to trust you. They can see that. They can see that you're admitting mistakes. They can see that you're open, and they can see that you're trying. Excuse me. And next, after that, is because of that, they're more likely to be open to your ideas, cooperate, collaborate, and give you the benefit of the doubt when things go wrong. And this is trust across the board. But just interesting here, I think finally, the last one, just seeing how much trust means you don't have to keep explaining yourself all the time. Whoa, because people understand you, which also is a timekeeping issue, I think. So next, Helen, is just what to do about that. And I think I really came to this because I just couldn't resist the C.R.A.P framework. It just amused me and interested me. And I think it's been something that shows the power of language and shows the power of humor. And in his article, Confronting Indifference Towards Truth, Dealing with Workplace Bullshit, he outlines the C.R.A.P framework. So C is about comprehend. And I think, Helen, so what you're doing with your comprehending, is being alert to the intent of the individual and organization and why they're doing it. So you're listening to someone bullshitting you, or you're listening to this language. Have a think back to our 4 areas, and you can understand why people are doing, and be clear about your own intent actually when you're doing this. So it's sort of quite interesting to start to look at yourself with this, and you realize, mainly myself, what an insecure, incompetent writer I actually am. Recognize, excuse me, and that really is very much about recognizing the types. I would have done a few different things with the framework here, and then act. So what Ian is saying from his academic work, you either escape from the bullshit, confront the bullshit, you accept it and follow suit, and you neglect it. And I've added that actually you support people by helping others achieve competence. And then also next, you actually lead show by example without how to communicate without bullshit. Prevent, I think what's quite interesting, encourage critical thinking. Value evidence over opinions. Organizations that value evidence over opinions, which is quite interesting because we're also being asked for our opinion all the time. So it's quite interesting, you know, how we communicate as individuals within organizations. Evidence is important, but opinions are also important, and it makes us realize how difficult this actually is. The next one is about prohibiting excessive jargon and statistical trickery. I mean, that's a really interesting one in its own right. We'll have a whole nother workshop on that. There's some really good work being done on that. And the final one is actually avoiding excessive meetings and point-ups meetings and committees. Now, that didn't fit to me, except actually we just know it does. The time wasted by all of these meetings, with all of these PowerPoints, with all of this guff. And I think those are his 4 key ways to prevent bullshit. But also I'd like to go into the next slide. He's done some interesting work which you might be interested in an organizational bullshit perception scale. And he didn't manage to have a rude acronym for that. And there are 3 dimensions of this. The organization has a regard for the truth and support of evidence. And it's the extent that leaders themselves contribute to producing, allowing, or encouraging bullshit, which is interesting, isn't it? It's all about the boss, he calls it. And then the systemic use of bullshit language. So that's all the stuff that we've got. Excessive use of acronyms, jargon in statements that are neither overly abstract or unreasonably complicated. I love that. Overly abstract, unreasonably complicated. I think there's sums it up really well. So I think if you're looking at that, and the next slide is his article on that, and they do work for organizations on that. But now what you've come for, actually, so you've got all that you didn't know you were getting, really. Let's look at communicating with clarity. So the whole cultural transformation that's rooting out addiction to manipulation is another workshop. So let's just start with George Orwell. Now, I don't know, apologies if everybody knew this. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know this, but most good writing books and articles refer to George Orwell's 6 rules of writing. And they are brilliant. I tried to think, well, what should I be doing? And it came back to one of these. So I'm going to tell you them. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing. So that's all of our stuff, isn't it? Right? All of the stuff that we were using. Never use a long word where a short one will do. Cut a word out. Always cut a word out. I'm really learning that. That is really good too. And never use the passive where you can use the active. Someone said that in the chat. This passive language is actually really the absolute opposite of what engages people. And never use a foreign phrase, scientific word, or jargon word if you think of an everyday English equivalent. And break any of these rules rather than say anything outright barbarous. And part of the thing I thought with some of these words that we're looking at, they're just barbarous. We just don't like them. So I just love those. And I would say, if you even just take this from that presentation, that's almost all you need to know. Moving to the next one, though, I'm going to give you a couple of tips from my. Oh no, I'm not. I'm going to give you this brilliant thing. This is the Hemingway editor, the Hemingway editor app, and the URL is there. You put your writing in here, and it tells you how you've got too many adverbs. It tells you about the passive voice. It tells you a simpler alternative, and it says, you know, what's hard to read and what's very hard to read. It is crazily good. And you put your writing in that you're really proud of, and then you find you're just not as good as you thought you were. But I could really recommend this. It's just a really interesting way of taking George Orwell's 6 writing and putting them in there. Really good. But the one thing it doesn't do, a lovely friend of mine is brilliant. He gets great Hemingway scores, but it's just way too long. So it doesn't work on that, but I'd really recommend it. And just a few more tips from me. I think a lot of it, you know, be aware that the bullshitter might be you. That when people look at all of this, it's always they bullshit, I communicate. It was sort of, people have found that we never think it's us. There's a great book, Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. So, you know, let's just think it's probably me. And what am I going to do about it? And ask yourself, you know this, really, really, you know this. What am I trying to say? To who? And what do they talk like? And what outcome would I like from this? Honestly, I know this, I say it all the time, and I still don't do it. It really is crazy. And the next one, you know, again, separate to this is obvious, we all know this, but actively finding imagery, metaphors, or stats that might make it clearer, and fresh ones. And George Orwell's Politics in the English Language, I can recommend, and there's a link coming later. All the metaphors are fresh, and it's so hard to do, but it's so worth making the effort. And one thing I found, you know, if you can't think of anything else, try humor. Honestly, it goes a long way. People know everybody's trying, and you know, even if it's just putting it in quotes, I don't know, I think it's worth a go. And also I found from Joe Moran's book, he looks at writing as rhythm, which I thought was quite interesting, and something as really basic as varying your sentence length, using short, medium, and long sentences, and when in doubt, add a full stop. Very interesting. It just makes it look a little bit more professional when you're using short and medium and long, and it's sort of like, oh gosh, that's like a little trick I've learned. And after that, this is the torturous one, but it really works. Honestly, read it out loud often, and definitely before pressing send. But it's torture, but it really shows you the difference between written English and sort of saying it. And actually, you need to say like you communicate. Mark Carney said that with the Bank of England. If the Bank of England can do it, Mark Carney can do it, then we can do it. And then also, I think keeping the whole thing as short as you can. You know, all these reports that no one reads, just had to think how many things you don't read. Now, you don't want to then not do the important report, but also we have to recognize that people don't read stuff. And finally, with this one, chill when you realize that writing is mainly about rewriting. I've just read this great book, which you'll see, about rewriting, because you sort of think that real writers just do it and it happens and it all comes out on the page. It's just basically rewriting and trying hard and going over and over and over again. So just chill about that and knuckle down to rewriting until it gets right. And I just wanted to give you one thing next. This is a chart of mine that I did for my own. Oh, that didn't work, did it? I did this for myself, and I share it with people, so I'm sharing it with you. This is how writing happens. So you start off, you're thinking, yeah, this is going to be good. I've got a good idea. And then you're thinking, what was I on when I thought this piece of crap was a good idea? And oh, no, wait, that's quite interesting. Oh my God, this is so hard. Oh my God, I can't do this. I'm never going to do this. This is going to be awful. No one, oh my God. And you're in a really, oh, well, yeah, maybe. And then there is this false dawn moment when you think it's done and it's not done. And then you just want to get it out. And then at the end, you think, actually, you know, that's not bad. That was quite fun. And then you start the whole bloody loop all over again. So I just wanted to do that just to let you know, particularly that bottom red corner, it will happen, as we all know. And remembering that it's happening and you do climb out of it in the end, I find actually quite sort of motivating. And then finally, here's some great, the things I think, if I'm to recommend anything, I'll recommend these. Politics in the English Language. The style, the Economist style guide, honestly, is great. And a lot of you will know it already, but it's easy to understand. It's just incredibly helpful. I love Joe Moran's First You Write a Sentence, because what he's saying is our writing is just a collection of sentences, and that's what writing is. And then William Germano, I've just read on revision. And of course, it wouldn't be right if we didn't do the Apolitical Public Servant's Guide to Effective Writing, which is really good. And it's got pictures and a fantastic layout, thank God. So I really like that as well. And that is it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hilary. And thanks so much, everyone, also for bearing with us through technical difficulties to get us all the way here to the end. I just want to first add, because I know there were a few questions about this, we are going to be sharing a recording, and we're also going to be sharing Hilary's presentation. So you can go back over it if you didn't quite get the last graph, or if you want to print it out and put it on your desk. Don't worry, we'll be sending it out to you so you can use all of these resources, follow up, go read all the recommendations. We've got about 15 minutes or so for some questions before we wrap up. There were a couple of questions that have already come in that I wanted to go to first. So I really liked this one that came in from Aisha. where is the line between jargon or BS and phrases we just don't like? There was a real conversation going on earlier in the chat about like, well, I actually don't think that's jargon. I think that's just normal words. Can something be sort of key without that being jargon? Hilary, where do you think you could recommend that people kind of draw the line between personal dislikes of words and actual sort of jargon?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Obviously, I have no answer to that. Obviously, I haven't. But I think it's about your audience as well and your intent. I think it is. I think people, there was a great thing with something I read with companies, which is, who is the bullshitter? Everybody knows who the bullshitter is. Everybody knows who the person who's a little bit dodgy, the intent's not there. And it's so clear. We think it's not clear. We think we're getting away with it, and we're just not. So people value good intent and that you're trying. And also, I think it is about knowing your audience. So I think you can, being a bit more sort of respectful of others' values and trying to just be as clear as possible, because if you're being as clear as possible, it just minimizes the amount of bullshit phrases that you use and minimizes the possibility of doing that, of crossing over the line.
Thanks, Hilary. There was a great question that came in from James as well, and I really like the phrasing. James asks, is there a guide on how to convince others not to use jargon without insulting them and turning them off? And I think there's another question here about how do you get other people on board with this kind of writing if maybe institutionally, jargon or sort of BS is the norm?
That's your book title, James. That is a book title if I've never seen one. I just feel that humor is very important because, and back to, again, the understanding that people are trying, but a lot of it is organizational cultures are like that and everybody knows they are. So I think, if we are positioning this as not you are a bullshitter, stop, we need to be clear as an organization. We, the organization, you need to do, would like to be better in those sorts of areas. And look at this is it. This is the one. Look, open your mouth, stuff comes out. That's what this is an example of it in action. But I just think intent, humor, and like Apolitical does, I'm very impressed with Apolitical as an organization because they are quite sort of supportive and caring. And that I think is the key to helping people be more competent at doing this. And how leadership matters in that, honestly. If the big boss communicates well or admits that, okay, I'm really going to try and do this, catch me out, help me out, just genuineness, authenticity, and support, I think.
That was something I loved, Hilary, when we were talking about this workshop too, when you were sort of talking about the framework and how you've sort of added to it to add this slightly more compassionate interpretation, I think, that does assume a little bit more positive intent, I think, than maybe the initial framework did, which I think can be really helpful. There's a question here from Mark, which I think is really interesting. So Mark asks, is there a correlation with jargon and attention grabbing or positive language in the social media age? Do you think this is something that's sort of become more popular while maybe people are trying to sort of compete for people's attention? How do you think that sort of correlates?
Yes, very interesting. I mean, certainly the manipulation end of the spectrum, I understand, that the fake news, the misinformation, that is really being exacerbated through social media, and just through allowing it, just through airing it. So I think, yes, that doesn't help. The fact in a way that you've got fewer characters must also mean you can communicate clearly, or you can just put loads of rubbish characters together and it seems okay when you just bang it out, because a lot of it too is when we're on social media, we just bang it out. So I think lack of thought in social media also contributes to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Just scrolling through some of these questions now here as well. Can we talk a little bit about acronyms specifically? So I know we've heard this, not even just in this workshop, we've heard that acronyms can be a real challenge in public service especially. Can be difficult for new joiners, it can be difficult for people outside the organization to understand. And I know the sort of simple answer is just don't use them. But Hilary, do you have any other tips for people who are maybe trying to get away from the use of acronyms or maybe get their organization away?
Well, organizations perhaps have better titles than some long acronym. This is a classic in academia where every Horizon 2020 project has to have this funky little acronym, and it just puts you off to start with. So yes, that. I'm not hung up about acronyms too much, as long as they said in the chat, they're explained, because and I'm not hung up on them if they actually shortcut something that is known. But it's there was a great article somewhere on acronyms. It's the proliferation of them, one after the other after the other. So you don't have to use all these acronyms all the time. So use them when, like any other writing, use them judiciously when you need them, and avoid them when you're not. It's hard though. Actually, I'd like to just add another one on that. So, about different, someone just said something in the chat about different audiences. So you guys particularly have got it hard. I was talking to a couple of guys in the UK government that have done a fantastic report, but the upfronts were just full of this junk language. And I'm saying, guys, this is a fabulous report. Why have you got all this at the front? And they said, well, Hillary, our politicians need to see these phrases, or else they don't think we've done our job properly. So they have to pad out all these awful, bullshit political phrases and then have the report. So I appreciate that you guys have got all sorts of different pressures on you to communicate in different ways for different audiences. And if you're, one's paymasters speak in that language, then it has to be reflected, or else you're not doing your job right and you're not fitting in. So it's tricky.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention and ask something about that too, that kind of context point, because obviously you can't always just simplify your language for every single audience. That's not always going to work. And people have, different requirements for writing briefings and different types of writing that they're expected to do. Definitely a little bit of that, I think, being discussed in the chat too. And Aisha saying, it's a great point, difference between acronym use amongst colleagues who may be aware of their meetings or their meanings, versus acronyms for new staff and the public who may not know what they mean. So I think that context point is one that kind of underlies a lot of what we've discussed, but maybe haven't addressed explicitly until now.
Yes, I think also that is a lot of jargon meaning specialist language. It's just use out of context, because it just shortcuts such a lot of words, really. But that's when it's out of context, and it looks disrespectful when people just don't sort of show that they're taking into consideration that you might not be, as knowledgeable as they are in certain areas. And that's what makes jargon and bullshit feel bad, because you just feel disrespected.
Absolutely. This was a question that was submitted ahead of time, and I think this is a really interesting one, and sort of goes back to the point about how you can get other people, maybe we're sort of speaking to people who already understand that you don't need this jargon and you need to cut down. But if we want to take this into organizations, specifically in the public service, how do you communicate to colleagues the impact that government speak has on stakeholders? So I know, Hillary, you talked a lot about trust and things like that. So how do you kind of take that back and communicate that with other people you work with?
Well, we had this conversation just this morning. It's about evidence. And I think that's quite interesting that Ian has done this academic work, but there needs to be more, evidence of how it harms organizations and in what ways it harms. And when I was doing my work on trust, and this was trust in governance particularly, but there was very little out there that really shows what damage is done. So I would say, get more research and get evidence of why it doesn't work and what it does when it does work. And then you can talk about it from a position of no bullshit and no just opinion. You're getting to know what's real. But then we all know it. That's the thing too. We all know it. And sometimes people are just wanting it to be said and acknowledged. And then you can figure out a way around it yourselves. You don't, because people just know, and they know it's bad, and they just feel impotent in doing anything about it.
I suppose just putting it out in the open and naming it for what it is can, make people reconsider how they're using language.
But I think things like the C.R.A.P scale, I don't know about the public service, I don't know, but just that in its own right is engaging. It's just lets a conversation happen that wouldn't happen if you didn't have that engaging little framework to talk through.
Absolutely. This was another one that was submitted ahead of time that I think is a really interesting one, again, for this kind of specific public service context. So with many key messages and talking points being created by others, so you're not always writing your own opinion or your own view, how do you cut through the jargon while also staying on point with the government's views or staying on point with your department's views that you're having to communicate?
I have no idea how. Tell me, because that's just really probably the hardest thing that happens in being a civil servant, I would imagine. I think that's the balancing act that you're having to do. I mean, I think from what I've known and talking to you, Helen, certain departments are, react and interact in certain ways. So, you can have a proper conversation with one department, but another department less so. So I think it's very difficult. I'll tell you what actually is important in this and lots of areas is having champions. So champions in different departments, who really support you and support this, whether it be, no bullshit sort of approach, and identifying those people who really do want it to happen differently. And then sort of using them to springboard, the verb to springboard, I actually said it, just to help you get your messages out. That's the trouble, it's so hard.
I know, I catch myself, now that I'm really aware of it, I've caught myself today saying a lot of the words that I've been trying to avoid saying. But I really love that idea of having champions, I think, or having, advocates of plain speak. I mean, today, hopefully now we've got 550 plus plain speak advocates going off into the world and going off into your respective departments, hopefully.
But I bet they were all there in the first place, or they wouldn't be here, you see. That's the trouble.
Very true.
Their colleagues, they are plain speaking people. I'm sure you are plain speaking people. You just need some help to try and help the others.
I would actually love to hear in the chat, since again, some people will have already had this experience and been sort of working on this for a long time. So if anyone has any tips of what's worked for you in your department, would love to hear in the chat in these kind of final few minutes as we're starting to wrap up. Would love to hear what's worked for you. Any plain writing tips, any tips for bringing other people on board, especially in the public service context. I think there are some unique challenges. Obviously, everyone faces very similar challenges with plain speak and writing, but there are some that are a little bit more unique to the public service. And so I would love to hear a little bit about what you've experienced. Some people also talking about some of those very specific challenges. There's a great point from Melissa. It can be tough when something is clearly written and then gets reviewed by other internal branches and then gets morphed into legalese or governmentese. So maybe you don't have final control over the ultimate version that gets shared. Okay, a few great points I just want to share here before we start wrapping up. Poppy says adapting information to easy read for people with communication needs often forces us to review the actual meaning of a thing. That's a great point. I saw, actually, I want to briefly touch on this, a few questions about accessibility too, and how this ties in, the plain language ties into accessibility. There were some really great points about how some people's departments and governments have priorities to use plain language for accessibility reasons, not just for sort of jargon BS reasons. Hillary, anything you want to add on that sort of accessibility point?
Yeah, very good point. No, I think that absolutely is it. Because we all need to be understood by as wide a group as possible. And I think that it's being understood, I think, to me.
Absolutely. I'll just read off a few of these tips that are coming through as well. Lots of descriptions of off-piste. I know there was a lot of chat about what off-piste meant. Hopefully we've got some definitions in there about going off track, I think, is what some people have said. So points about how accessibility means larger font and therefore less words, which makes it easier to have plain language if you've got a smaller amount of space to work with. So joining your plain language action and information network. I think, yeah, Carlene has said the KISS acronym, keep it simple, stupid. I have heard that one as well. Peer reviews of written work, that's a great point. Get other people to read it, not just yourself. Calling out acronyms and abbreviations within your own teams and departments can really help making other people aware of it. Couple of well-placed supporters, so that advocacy idea as well. Really excellent points here. Bringing in people not in your culture, so being mindful of accessibility from a culture perspective as well. It's a really great point. Really fantastic tips. I'd encourage everyone to sort of scroll through. There's a lot going on in the chat with some really helpful tips. In the final sort of 4 minutes as we wrap up, first, I'm going to do a really quick final poll. This is just one to ask you how you felt about today's workshop. It's completely anonymous, just going to be used internally by my team. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this workshop? 10 being the best workshop you've ever attended, 1 being the worst. It goes from 10 down to 1. So I'll give everybody just a minute. And Hillary and I had a chat about this, and I have not called it a feedback survey, Hillary, to avoid using feedback.
Everybody feedback to everybody. So, and I am unoffendable, and I am really genuinely wanting to learn this, because this is not a, I'm an expert, do what I say conversation. This is a, oh my God, how are we going to do this conversation? So I'm really interested to know.
And I'm not going to flash these up, but I will, Hillary, I can chat with you after about sort of where the percentages are lying. So I'll give everybody just a minute. We've got about 75% participation. Give you about 10 more seconds to respond. And then we'll do our final wrap up in the last 3 minutes. Okay, excellent. I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. Thanks so much, everyone, for sharing your thoughts. Now, I have one more thing I'd like you all to share in the chat, and it is your one-word takeaway. In an exercise in brevity, see if you can distill what you've learned today into one word. And Hillary, I'll challenge you to do the same.
Ooh, oh yeah, okay.
I'll give you a minute to think. We've got some good responses coming in on the chat if you need a bit of inspiration. Some intent, simplify, BS, crap, brilliant, off-piste. Plain, simplify, B.A.R.F, clarity, relate, honesty, integrity. That's great. All right, Hillary, feeling inspired? Do you want to share your one-word takeaway?
I was sort of thinking back to that last question about how to engage people about it. And I've sort of put authentic, which is a bullshit word again, but it's being genuine about why it's important, and it's just being genuinely open to helping people, supporting people, to trying to be it yourself. And so I think that's why I put it in, but I don't like it. I can't think of a better one. Being yourself, being allowed to be yourself within an organization and communicate as you would like to communicate. I think and as soon as one is allowed to do that, it's quite powerful and actually quite engaging. And I think we can all be little tiny beacons in our own little world if we want to, if we have the time to make the effort that it takes.
That's great. I love that. Authentic. I think some people have said genuine is a similar one.
Genuine's nice.
Put in the chat. I think my one word would be intent. So kind of getting behind the intent of why people actually use jargon and BS, and that it's not always for negative intent. People don't always do it for malicious reasons. Sometimes it's just because they want to fit in, or they want to sound smart, or they're not sure what else to say. And I think that kind of combination between asking about people's intent and then assuming a bit of positive intent is really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much, Hillary. In our final minute, I just want to thank you for giving us the last hour. I know I've been frantically taking notes, and I'm really looking forward to getting into some of the resources that you've sent. We'll be sending that tomorrow in a follow-up email, so you'll all get a follow-up email with a recording from today's workshop. Hillary's presentation will highlight some of those resources that Hillary's talked about, and you'll find them all in hyperlinks in the presentation itself. So lots to dive into. In addition to that, there are lots more ways that you can keep learning with Apolitical. We would love to see you at another workshop. There are lots of articles on our website, including the one that Hillary wrote that sort of sparked this whole workshop. We'll make sure to share that in the follow-up email as well. We've also got some more courses, workshops, and boot camps coming up. We've got one about engaging the community to solve climate change, a great point about communication in there as well, and plain speak to solve a really big issue that's coming up on the 13th of January, a workshop about tackling unconscious bias in the public service on the 19th, and a boot camp about how you can set goals that you will actually keep. So I think all of this really in line also with setting yourself up well for the year with your communication, with your goal setting, and with everything. Thank you all so much for giving us your time. It's great to see you. I hope to see you again soon. In the final sort of 30 seconds, if you want to briefly turn your camera on, you can give us a wave. You can come off mute and say goodbye in the language of your choice. Thanks so much. It's been wonderful to see you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. That was brilliant.
C.R.A.P.
Bye.